and start with the roll call.
Alderperson Robinson. Hurt.
Here.
Tweet. Here. Swanson. Here. Parker. Here. Poulos.
Here.
And Healy.
Here.
And Mayor Tomes.
Here. Thank you very much. Public comment. I don't have the sign-up sheet here. Any public comment for the study session, not the regular city council?
You want me to go grab it? I think everybody so far signed up for the main.
It could be. Is there two different sign-ups? No. Okay. Okay. All right. If nobody here, I'll just verbally, if nobody here wants to speak for study session, well, then you'll have an opportunity at this council meeting. Okay. Presentation. Strategic housing plan. We have presenters here, consultants.
Hello, my name's Sarah Diot. I'm here with my colleague Lindsay Evans. We're with PGAV Planners, a consulting firm that we're helping with the strategic housing plan for you all. So for our presentation today, we're going to talk through just generally what the purpose of the strategic housing plan is, how it was structured, the key findings, and then we'll talk about ultimately the strategic roadmap and the strategies and next steps, and then some comments about the priority sites and possible annexation areas that are identified, important considerations, and then we'll talk about what's next after this meeting. So in terms of project goals, the main purpose of this plan was really to work with the city to help elected officials, city staff, developers, community members really understand what the existing housing stock and housing condition is, what the needs are, and then ultimately create a blueprint for next steps and really help the city understand where it should go over the next 10 years. But with that being data informed. So not just we feel like we should go this way, but really having that background of information to build on, and then ultimately provide those strategies and recommendations. So in terms of the plan itself, it's structured to kind of walk through just generally the context about the city, about the plan itself, thinking about the community involvement that we had. So we met with several community stakeholders. We met with planning and zoning and got their feedback in the middle of the process. Met with many members of city staff as well to speak to them. And then we went into kind of the data analysis and research phase of that. And so thinking about demographic trends, housing inventory, the housing market and affordability, and then existing programs related to housing. And then in terms of the next steps, then talks more about what overall we found and goes into that strategic roadmap. And so that's what we'll kind of focus on here. So talking about the key findings, some of the highlights essentially of what we found. So talking to stakeholders and just our own understanding of the city really has a lot of great architecture and character and natural environment with a lot of streets, trees, the forestry, things like that, that are assets to the community, but they also are not fully realized and can be built upon and strengthened. And so then thinking about that existing housing stock and the importance of intervening as early as possible with deterioration to really help protect that housing stock moving forward and improve stability of the neighborhoods as well. And then walkability and bikeability is something that is very desirable for a lot of people, especially young professionals, young families. And it's something that some of the neighborhoods in Davenport and Bettendorf offer that are not always as offered and as competitive here. Yet there is this robust street grid for the northeastern kind of portion of the city. And by investments in the sidewalk network, investments in cycling infrastructure, things like that, you can really build on those existing assets to really strengthen that and be more competitive there. And then in terms of one of the things that was brought up to us a lot was the fire sprinkler system requirement in single-family and two-family dwellings. And so this was a very intentional choice to really focus on building and life safety by the city. But there's also an important consideration relating to the cost that does add to housing construction. And so thinking about ways in which the city can continue to support development, perhaps help overcome that extra burden of cost, or think about ways in which maybe different building materials might provide the same level of safety that could also be offered as alternatives for development to really pursue that important effort of building safety while also not hindering development as well. And then thinking about the importance of trust between residents and city staff, and so the importance of continued engagement with residents, transparency about projects that are happening, programs, processes, and then also thinking about administrative processes and how those are helpful to people who are interested in development or in making improvements to their home or things like that. And so thinking about ways to improve the website or documentation or help walk people or developers through these processes so that there's not as much of a barrier in that respect. And then in terms of kind of demand, in particular, opportunities for older adults and individuals with disabilities are in high demand. So thinking about potential opportunities for senior housing or accessible and adapted housing opportunities. And then also thinking about the college students in need of off-campus housing. And currently there's about 400 to 500 students each year that are in need of off-campus housing. And while those also often sit vacant in the summer months. And so how do you provide that, but also think about that vacancy that might be happening in the summer? And then also thinking about subsidized affordable housing and how there has been concern about overconcentration in certain areas. But the Housing Authority and CHP have really put a lot of effort into focusing on smaller scale development, strategically located developments, and so continuing that effort and also just overall continuing to collaborate and work with them as important partners in housing in Rock Island. And so taking all of those key findings and going to, well, now what do we do with all that information is really where we then get into this strategic roadmap. And so this is intended to be a guide for what you do next. And so in the plan itself, in the document, it's both narrative form, and then there's also a matrix, which is essentially the steps you can take for each of these kind of big picture items. And so thinking about these three key categories that we divided the strategies into, which would be strategies for existing housing, strategies for new housing development, and then ultimately for shaping the city's narrative. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those now. So in terms of existing housing, as mentioned, the city's existing housing stock is one of its big assets. And so continuing to protect that and preserve that is important. And so thinking about building codes, code enforcement, nuisance policies, the rental registry, the vacant, abandoned, and foreclosed registry, and how all of those different programs operate, and their ultimate purpose of making sure all housing in Rock Island is safe and habitable, and making sure that those efforts are coordinated and continue, and that they're able to continue to be effective moving forward. And so really focusing on moving from, or continuing to move, as the city has already been making these efforts, from reactive code enforcement to proactive. So thinking about what those interventions can be before a property gets to a state where it needs to be, where it needs code enforcement action. And then thinking about across departments, are they communicating with each other? Is data shared across departments that can really help with this information and kind of intervention? And then ultimately supporting homeowners and property owners in maintaining and rehabilitating properties. And then for new housing, thinking about how to support new housing development in the city. And so there's essentially three ways where this could happen, one of which is infill, which would be kind of one-off homes being built on a lot in between some other existing homes. You could have a larger site redevelopment, which could be a large multifamily building. It could be 10 single-family homes on a large lot. A lot of different options there. And then annexation, which would be bringing in additional land within the city's boundary, so expanding that boundary, whether that's for future development on it or recently developed land. And so thinking about those and working with the city to really think about where that could happen. And so we focused on identifying 10 priority sites for the city for new development. And then we also thought about what's important in terms of thinking about annexation. And so the importance of really having a clear annexation policy. So not just jumping to annexation, but making sure that you're understanding the potential costs of that. And then updating policies and procedures to really just make sure that that's not a barrier for new development. And then ultimately focusing on local partners that are already working on developing or building housing, and really focusing on making sure they have the support they need to continue what they're doing. And then strategies for the city's narrative is really focused on the fact that from what we would hear from stakeholders and from planning and zoning, among residents, there is an immense sense of pride of living in the city, support of the school districts, the neighborhoods, but there is this perception of, by non-residents, that Rock Island might not be the community of choice to live in. And so thinking about that discrepancy and how to make sure that people understand and know what residents are feeling and making other people want to live in Rock Island too, and understanding what those assets are. And so thinking about the way in which the city is viewed and how it can make an effort to kind of change that. And so things like that can be starting as simple as updating the city's website and making sure it's development friendly and easy for residents to navigate, or someone who's thinking about moving to the city, understanding and easily navigating that. But then also understanding like what programs exist, what are the resources available, and then overall just coordinated marketing and thinking about how do we share the stories of the residents that love to live here, or how do we communicate the efforts that the city is putting in to improve neighborhoods or improve infrastructure, or making steps to fulfill some of its plans. And so making sure all of that information is shared publicly and really trying to help kind of focus on the benefits of the city. And so thinking about some of those priority sites and possible annexation areas, ultimately in terms of the priority sites, there are 10 that were identified as opportunities for new development. And so they've undergone a preliminary review of feasibility, but there's still more that will need to be done just to make sure. And so that would include from the city side, thinking about have any past environmental or engineering reports happened on these sites, investigating the infrastructure and wherever possible, improving that to make development on these sites more feasible, as that is one way where the city can actually help with the cost, is by helping reduce the developer's infrastructure costs. And so thinking about that, if sites aren't currently zoned for residential development, making sure that they're proactively rezoned to, again, reduce those barriers and reduce the time that a developer might need to kind of come in and develop there. And then thinking about if there's site control and if there's any adjacent parcels that would be useful for that development. And then thinking about all of the different funding mechanisms that the city could potentially leverage to help development happen. And so that could be things like tax increment financing, enterprise zone, the River's Edge redevelopment area, or other possible incentives. And then ultimately, not just waiting for development to come, but also proactively going out and reaching out to developers and thinking about these sites and what you want on them. And so there's more detail in the plan document about each of these sites, but the sites are essentially split into two categories. Level 1 being sites that are already or very close to being development ready. And then level 2 are sites that might have additional barriers, whether that's relating to site control or they might have potential flooding risk that might need to be an additional effort to mitigate, or infrastructure challenges, things like that. And so it's just important also to think about with these priority sites, though these have been identified, it doesn't mean development shouldn't happen or can't happen anywhere else, but these are really where the city will focus its efforts. And that smaller scale development, that infill development should still be happening throughout the city as well. And so just thinking about how to limit, instead of trying to focus on everything all at once, how can we start somewhere? And then in terms of annexation, so there's 3 possible areas that were really kind of identified as available for possible annexation based on just the city's existing boundaries, neighboring communities, things like that. But the important part of this is really that the city needs an annexation policy in place that can really serve as a guiding document to determine if any land should be annexed or not. And so it will help ask those questions and make sure that that thought is put into how much will this cost the city? How much will it cost to expand our infrastructure or our resources to these areas that we could annex? And then how much revenue might it bring in? And determining if that is a financial decision that makes sense before even pursuing then it any further. And so again, it's not about rushing to annex anywhere, but really just making sure that the city can approach it if it becomes interested in this in a way that really is beneficial for the community. And then ultimately, once an annexation policy is in place and there might be sites for residential annexation or development, really focusing any infrastructure improvements to make sure that those are able to reach those areas if that were to occur. So again, these 3 areas are primarily identified just based on where there is land that is not in another neighboring municipality, it is bordering the city, and then also just thinking generally about topography and things like that. But again, thinking about this as opportunities, but really the first step would be an annexation policy overall. And then jumping into just some important considerations moving forward, taking all of those key findings and strategies and priority sites into consideration, is that if for the city, housing is truly important and valued and a priority, there really needs to then be emphasis on that, and on that residential development just as much as commercial or industrial projects. And so really making sure that if this is important, it's important not just in what you say, but in also the actions that you're taking and the incentives that you're providing and things like that. And so it's important to think about it as a policy and mindset change for the city. And then in terms of priority sites, so again, it's not about waiting for development to come. It's also proactively promoting these sites and really reaching out to those partner organizations or developers and informal discussions as well as formal requests for proposals. So thinking about what ways the city can put that effort in to try and attract development to come. And then about messaging and communication, it's really about making sure that the city is putting effort into its communication and its messaging to really help shift that narrative and really make Rock Island a community of choice for the region. And thinking about ways to build Rock Island's image, make it the city feel approachable for development, and just kind of addressing some of those perceptions that might be in place that could be overcome just through some improved messaging and marketing. And so in terms of next steps, so we presented earlier this month to Planning and Zoning Commission. We're here with you all now. On April 7th, the Planning and Zoning Commission would vote to recommend the plan. If that passes, it would then come to you all to vote for adoption on April 14th. And so I believe you all were provided a copy of the draft by Tanner and his team. And so that will be kind of finalized in time for that voting on April 7th. So now we can open it up for any questions from you all.
So some of the sites you have on there as potential sites are also sites the city has been looking for commercial development. Mm-hmm. So are you suggesting that we don't look for commercial development in those areas and we change the direction to look only for residential development?
So some of the areas in the plan are also described as having mixed-use development potential. So it could be a mixed-use building where there's commercial or retail on the ground floor and development on the upper residential on the upper levels, or it could be, a lot of the sites are pretty large, so it could be one corner of the site has commercial or retail, and then another portion has residential. So that's typically what the recommendation is for those sites that were under consideration as well for commercial.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Not so much a question, but just an observation. As everyone up here knows, the Rock Island Downtown Alliance has been engaged in a branding exercise for downtown Rock Island, and I see a lot of similarities between that and the points about messaging and branding effectively for the city of Rock Island. I think that we can take some lessons learned from the Downtown Alliance's exercise on branding and expand it to the entire city. But that would be something that I would like to see.
I agree with that. Any other comments? I think it's great. Goes in quite a bit of depth. Boy, quiet group. Nothing? All right.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you very much. We're done early. All right, we got a motion to adjourn? Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Adjourned until 6:45.